Let's talk about language. Um, it seems like there's a joke there. Talk about language, but it seems like it's going to be lame if I have to think that hard about it. Okay, um, here's what we're going to talk about in this lecture. My microphone's in my eye line. Sorry. We're going to talk about the definition of language. So, what is language? How linguists, psycholinguists, and cognitive scientists all study language, and then also three famous linguists, Skinner, Piaget, and Chomsky, and this debate around the nature of language, like what is language and how does it occur in the brain? How does it happen in the brain? Um, just to warn you, well, and actually, not to warn you, but this will be just a few of the names that come up that are important. So this isn't one of those classes where every lecture is going to be like two or three more people that you have to know. It's not really the way that this is laid out. Occasionally, there's going to be another important researcher that you need to know, but really, we're focusing more on facts and the way that things work, and like more process oriented, and not so much on the individual researchers. These are important because they are kind of like the leaders of these individual fields. Even then, it's not necessarily the person that we're focusing on, it's the field that they kind of represent. So don't worry if you're not good with names. You don't have to know that many. I did not click that. That was interesting. Okay, so if you've had 205 with me, you have heard this quote before, but communication is the essence of human life. This is from a statement that Asha put out in 1990. It goes on a little further. It's not exactly just about, they're not just talking about like one day they woke up and thought, hey, let's talk about communication. It's actually talking about augmentative and alternative communication devices, because it goes on to say that everyone has a right to be able to communicate as best as they can. That doesn't really come up so much in this class because we're talking about language. But it is important to note that, as I say here, language is a rule-based system of communication, often with both grammar and vocabulary. So those are the rules that we're dealing with. It's important that everybody that's communicating with the same language knows the rules, because when you know the rules, really the language is the system of rules that you're using in whatever modality of communication you decide to use. Let's just go with speaking for right now. There are certain word orders, there are certain word choices, there are certain prosodic factors, the prosody, the way that I'm stressing certain words or putting pauses in between, that become important for us to understand language. But language is a form of communication, a system of communication. So if communication is the essence of life, language is really what facilitates that communication. So regardless of modality, effective communication requires language, effective communication that can convey new ideas. So you can have a system of communication. Again, if you've had 205, you know about the bees and the waggle dance. If you haven't had 205, man, that's fantastically interesting. And I'll tell you a little bit about it. Essentially, bees will fly out to a flower and they'll come back to the hive. They will then communicate to the other bees where the flower is that they found. It doesn't have to be a flower. It could be like, they just find something that researchers have put out, whatever, but some source of food. And what they do is they turn their body in the direction that the flower is located in reference to the sun. So there's like a main strip in the hive, and they're going to turn their body relative to that main strip in the hive. And that angle of their body relative to the main strip in the hive is the same as the angle of the flower relative to the sun. Then they're going to waggle. The amount of waggling that they do shows the amount of work that it's going to take to get to that flower. So really light waggling would mean like this flower is real close, and a whole bunch of waggling is like you're going to have to fly really far to get there. So that's communication. It has some rules. It doesn't have rules that can be manipulated to convey new information. Really, the only information that can be conveyed is where's the flower and how much work does it take to get there. You couldn't break this apart and say, like, build a novel based, like a mystery bee novel based off of the waggle dance. So anyway, regardless of modality, effective communication that can convey new ideas, like a mystery novel for bees, is going to require language, which is the rule-based system of communication that usually contains grammar and vocabulary. The bee waggle dance doesn't contain vocabulary. In a way, it may contain grammar, but it doesn't really contain vocabulary. Okay. So I said this, I alluded to this, but language is important for all communication. Spoken communication, of course, our language faculties in our brain make spoken communication possible. They make written communication possible. A lot of body language is also governed by the same language faculties. And of course, sign language, ASL, or any kind of sign language are also going to use those same language faculties. It's kind of a domain general process, languages, that facilitates all these different types of language. Now, there are different rules for spoken and written English. There's not supposed to be. What is going on? It's like I set up timings, but I didn't. There's not supposed to be different rules for spoken and written English, but we can do things with spoken English that you wouldn't do writing, right? Or you're not supposed to do writing anyway. And it makes it hard for someone who knows the rules for written English to understand what someone's saying when they're writing the way that you talk. And I'm sure that if you've started getting into like a writing journey, everybody has kind of like a writing journey of learning how to be a better writer, that you know that one of the things you've had to stop yourself from doing is writing the way that you talk. We all talk not in a way that is great for writing. And then, of course, body language and ASL, like we talked about. So let's talk about psycholinguistics. Essentially, you could call this class, and other universities probably do call this class psycholinguistics. Some might call it cognitive linguistics. They're all the same thing. Language science is also known as psycholinguistics. It's also known as cognitive linguistics. To some people, there's a distinction among some people that cognitive linguistics it means something really narrow. Let's use it in the broad sense that makes a little bit more sense. All of these disciplines focus on the brain and cognitive processes. So we're talking about, your major, ostensibly. I know not everybody that takes this class is a speech and hearing major, but your major for a lot of you is speech and hearing. And this is mostly about the brain and other cognitive processes, because that kind of facilitates getting to the speech portion, right? You have to go through the language faculties to get to speech. A lot of people find this to be one of the more difficult to understand areas of the entire speech and hearing discipline. It's not as concrete as looking at like some bones and muscles or cartilages and muscles, and the cartilages move. You can see that in like picture form. You can kind of envision this happening. Acoustic waves in 375. You can visualize them. You can see them. You can hear them. And so this is a little bit less concrete. It's happening up here. We're talking about something that you can't really see unless we happen to have some imaging that comes from fMRI studies or something like that. So, and even then you're like a few steps removed from actually seeing things change in the brain. So it's a little bit different than these other things. It's harder to envision, but because it's more difficult to study, because it's more difficult to envision, it's also one of the most cutting edge areas within speech and hearing science. We're dealing with the brain. We're dealing with how people think. We're dealing with how we get to words. There are theories that are tested right now There are theories that are found to be not true right now. There's debates that are going on right now. We're going to talk about one about what is the nature of language. It started in the 50s and it's still going. I mean, it actually started, if you want to go back in like philosophy terms, this is a really old debate. Like one of the oldest ones about thought. But in the same terms that we're talking about it today, it's been going on since like the 50s or 60s, and it's still going on because this is a cool area with a lot of research and hard research too. A lot of there's some distinctions between the sciences. What is a hard science? What is a soft science? And there's a range. It's not like you can just place something into a hard science or a soft science. And depending on how language science, psycholinguistics, cognitive linguistics are looked at, it can be very concrete, very hard science. There's some questions that you really just can't answer in that way. So you have to kind of start with a soft science, but then move it towards the hard science area. So it kind of runs the gamut of how we actually look at these things. There's a lot of current research in this area. Some of it is going on here at ASU, and this is actually an area where I do research as well. As you know from the introduction video, if you've had any of my classes, one of the things I work on is swear words, also different valences of sounds, all those kinds of things. So it feeds into this same kind of research. The basic question that we wrestle with in this area, though, is like, how do we observe thought? When we break it down, really what we're doing is thinking. Language is thinking. It's placing thoughts and ideas into the rules that we all already know about language to communicate them to somebody else. So how do we observe thought? It's a great question, and we've got some methods. Are any of them completely foolproof? No. Not. I mean, it's not like light where you can just look at it or take a light meter and actually measure the amount of lumens that are coming off of a light bulb. It's not like that. We do have some methods, though. Some research focuses on direct observation of brain areas. There's two main ways that you're doing that. One is with fMRI. You've probably had an MRI. Not all of you have probably had an fMRI. In fact, I would hope maybe that none of you have had an fMRI unless you were participating in research. MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, sort of like an X-ray, but they're looking at more soft tissues. Well, an fMRI is a little bit different. The F stands for functional magnetic resonance imaging. And actually what's going on here is that it focuses only on the brain, and it's actually looking at changes in the blood oxygen level dependent signal. The magnetism of the atoms that make up the blood, like the iron, it's actually blood oxygen level. Yeah, so oxygenated blood. Yeah. So you're basically looking at, magnetic atoms in the brain. This assumes that when a brain area is active, more blood is going to be sent to that area. It needs to increase functioning, and increased functioning means more blood has to go to that area. Assuming that that's true, you can use fMRI to look at where more blood is going to in the area of the brain. It's not usually good for fast processes. The reason for this is it takes a picture of a slice of your brain and then moves down. So it starts here, and it goes like clunk, 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 and then it takes a picture right here, and then it moves down, and then it takes another one, and it just does all this clunking around, and it moves down through the brain. The research that I've done used I want to say a 2TR. Might have been a 3. I think I've used 3 and 2. When I started, I used a 3. And then most recently, I think we've switched to 2. What that means is it takes 3 seconds to take an entire picture of the brain. So if you're tracking something that's happening in language, think about how fast language moves. I mean, we could put up a timer. You know what? You're watching this on a video. It's got a little thing down there at the bottom. So move your mouse around. Look at the clock. It's counting up. And right now, from me talking right here until now, that was 3 seconds. A lot of words happened in those 3 seconds. So if it takes us 3 seconds to take a picture of the brain, a lot of words have come in that amount of time. Or if you're measuring me speaking, a lot of decisions had to be made about what I was saying in that time. 2 TRs, 2 seconds. And we're down to 1 TR, although those machines are very expensive. They generate a lot of heat and they need a lot of room. So not many institutions have those. As technology gets better, they'll get smaller and they won't take up as much heat and electricity, and more places will have them. But right now, 1 TR, like a 1 second picture of the brain, is not common. We're still stuck at 2, basically. So if you want to see something that's happening fast, you're not going to do it with an fMRI. What is good about MRI is that you have great resolution of space. So like in the brain, looking at where something is happening, we can get down to 3 millimeters. I don't have my ruler. You've all got rulers. 3 millimeters is pretty small. The newest technology, which can be the way that you're measuring the brain, like the actual fMRI. It can also be methods that you're using to process the images that you're getting from the MRI. Can get down to about 1 millimeter of resolution, which is really small. So we can look at an area of the brain 1 millimeter in size that's actually firing. To get a significant signal, you probably need more areas. These are called voxels, so you need more voxels being active. If you just look at single voxels, you can get like accidental answers every once in a while that aren't true. But if you have more voxels active, that means that probably something's going on. And we can get each individual voxel down to somewhere between 3 millimeters and 1 millimeter. EEG stands for electroencephalogram. You're going to put electrodes on the outside of the brain, outside of the head, not the outside of the brain, the outside of the skull, outside of the skin. Like you just put on a cap and you run an EEG. EEG has excellent temporal resolution, but it doesn't have very good spatial resolution. The newest procedures that we have get spatial resolution down to like 2 to 3 centimeters. A space 2 to 3 centimeters. It's usually done as like a square area, so it's somewhere like 6 square centimeters. Something like that. But if you look at that, that's pretty small too, but centimeters versus millimeters. So EEG, you can get pretty close. fMRI is an entire order of magnitude less, but EEG has great temporal resolution. One thing that's done commonly is that studies will use fMRI and EEG together so that they get a really good look at where it's happening and when it's happening. But we have problems with this. One of those problems is that's expensive. Once you have the fMRI machine, you have to pay for the time. So right now, if I was going to use one to do research, you have to have a grant to be able to pay any of the different places who have one around the valley money to be able to use the fMRI machine. You also have to pay the MRI tech because I don't know how to set it up and like do the running of it. You have to have people that get the participants to sign these forms and put them in the thing and make sure they don't freak out. I can design the study, but I can't run it. So they're expensive. They're also time intensive. It takes a lot of time to get people, say I'm using college students, they have to then go from the university to wherever the fMRI machine is. It's time intensive because it takes a long time to go through these studies. EEG has a lot of setup that can be done usually at the university. We have a couple different setups here at ASU, one really good one and then some others. That's less time intensive, but it also takes a long time to run a person through. And then lastly, you can't always answer the questions you want to ask with fMRI and EEG. So we have to come up with other methods. And some of those other methods are, we call them behavioral methods because we're kind of looking at the behavior of the people while we run them through. So priming and implicit association. Priming is like, you're going to be answering questions. You're going to be saying whether something is a word or a non-word by hitting keys on your keyboard. You'll see a group of letters and you're going to say not a word. You see another group of letters, you're like, that is a word. That's going to take a certain amount of time. So that's the response time, is how long it takes you to decide if it's a word or not a word. If I say to you hospital and the next word that comes up is doctor, it's going to take you less time to answer that is a word when the word doctor comes up. Why is that? Because I've primed you to be thinking of words that are associated with hospitals. So that's a type of test that we do. That's called priming. We can also do something called implicit association. A lot of times you'll see this with, it started with products. So people want to know like the Oreo company wants to know, how do people feel about Oreos? And so what we're going to do is we're going to pair good words with this key over here and bad words with this key over here, like delicious and fancy and stuff like that, or like barf over here. And so then they're also going to pair like pictures of Oreo with the good and pictures of Chips Ahoy with the bad, and then they're going to see how fast do people hit those keys when they know that they're associated. Then they switch them. They'll switch which one the cookies are associated with, and they test you out that way too. And what they want to see is, are you faster to associate Oreos with good words than you are to associate Chips Ahoy with good words? And if you are, that's kind of, again, looking at priming, sort of. It's actually looking at how well you're able to associate these two terms, so you don't have to like switch modes in your brain as much. If you're able to answer quickly when Oreo and good words are paired, probably Oreo is more associated with good things. If you ask me, cookies in general are great. But you didn't ask me. Some other things that we can do is we can look at working memory tasks. We'll talk about these a lot more in the next section. We're going to talk about working memory, but one of these is an O-span task. Essentially, let me tell you working memory before I go into the O-span task. Working memory is how well can you hold information in your brain while you're doing something else. So it's not just memory. It's not like, hey, remember these numbers, 930. That's just memory. But this would be more like, hey, remember the numbers 930. Now, what were they backwards? And you'd have to say 039. Or I could give you a really long string, 253491930. What was that backwards? So you're having to like put those numbers in memory and then do something else, like rotate them around and give them backwards. That's something else. Another task is the O-span task, where essentially you're given letters to remember and you have to do mathematical operations in between each letter that you're given and then recite the letters back. So that's another way to measure working memory. You can't measure someone's working memory capacity with an imaging technique. So you can't, do an fMRI and see what someone's working memory capacity is. You just can't. You can look at like, where is this information processed? You can look at the what the signal does if you're using EEG when they're thinking about the information, like where it's being processed, what happens to the signal. But you can't tell with any of these how much they're actually able to remember. That has to be done behaviorally. We can also look at something called voice onset time. Looking at voice onset time is maybe not the right way to say this. What we actually do is we look at the perception of voice onset time. So p and b, they're made almost exactly the same way if you discount voicing. So p, b, it's just the lips. They're both labial sounds, right? So the difference between p and b is when the voice turns on, basically. So with p, if you slow it down, you go p. So the voice onset time is after the plosive. And with b, you go b. So the voice onset time is before the plosive. Okay, well, that's true. But the voice onset time, you can vary that. You could change it from b to like at the exact same time. B, like that. You can vary it along this dimension, and you can look at what people hear. Do they hear a B and then something strange and then a P? Well, no, actually we don't. There's a point at which it just radically changes. You hear ba 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 ba, and then all of a sudden pa 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 pa. It changes from a B to a P just instantaneously. Not everyone's point where it changes is the same. And remember, this is changing fluidly throughout these two. It kind of seems like you shouldn't just automatically change from one to the other, but we do. And it's not just English speakers, it's speakers of every language. We call this categorical perception. That's also not necessarily something that you could tell with an fMRI or EEG. Behavioral studies are necessary. And then if you're just rating how good or bad you feel a word is or a sound is, you also can't really do that with fMRI or EEG. We do know that there's neural correlates of like aversion and attraction, but if they're not strong feelings of aversion and attraction, like if it's just some simple word, you're not going to be able to do that. So you have to ask people to rate these things. So where is language science going? Well, as we learn more about the basic structure of language, this is going to push forward any discipline that uses language science. Psychology, speech and hearing science. We're looking at how to help people recover from strokes, multiple concussions, aphasia, all sorts of things like this. Well, stroke and aphasia go together. But all of these areas that tie into language are pushed forward as we understand more about language, where it's processed, how it's processed, all the different components that make up language. One of these things that some new research in two different areas are analyzing error patterns, like as people speak, can help identify neural problems, like the individual types of problems and also the areas where there might be problems after stroke. So that is a paper from 2018. This is ongoing research, and some of it's being done here at ASU as well. Not that researcher, but other researchers. And then also understanding how humans process language helps program generative AI like ChatGPT. And then also understanding how ChatGPT works can help us understand how humans are processing language. And that's a paper that was published this year. Oh, now I have to record this video again next year. Okay, so to keep on with this idea of generative AI, this is the distinctive features hypothesis. We're not going to talk about this much. This is a Chomsky thing. It's basically just a model of speech production and perception. It was based on this binary idea. So like any letter, any sound, not letter, any phoneme that you can create is going to be either like one of these things. You can put a plus or a minus in this box. So like a P is anterior and it's labial and it's not any of these other things. It's not voiced. A B is exactly the same as a P except it's voiced. And so this seems like it would work, except that going just like yes or no, 1 and 0, really binary like this, doesn't actually work with the way that we produce and perceive sound. So speech production is not always 100% the same. We have something called co-articulation is a thing that happens where different phonemes are not produced in the same way after other phonemes. So ga is not produced in the same place as alga. It moves back. So go ahead and do that. Ga, alga. And feel where your tongue touches. It moves back when you say alga. Even though ga and alga, you can tell that the ga in there is the same, but there's your categorical perception again. You learn that those are in the same category. It's on the right track, though. The distinctive features hypothesis is on the right track. And it gets us towards neural networks, like current neural networks. ChatGPT is based on, well, it's not speaking, but there are other ones that do speak, that create, like you can program them to speak. YouTube is filled with videos where like this AI just reads stuff from Reddit. I'm sure you've seen it and been annoyed by it. And so those work by, instead of looking at ones and zeros, pluses and minuses, they look at weightings. So probabilities instead of this binary system. And that was Chomsky. Again, I want to underline that. Chomsky. He's going to come up again in the debate over innate language. Is language innate? This is an active debate. We don't know the answer to this question. There's lots of little positions in between the two main poles, and the main poles are it is not innate, it is learned, like any behavior. It's a behaviorist kind of thing, or language is special, language is innate, and it's special to humans. And then there's a lot of little positions anywhere between those two. There is scientific evidence that we can point to. There are definite truths that we can look at. There's evidence and research and all these things. The problem is that even though we can do studies and make arguments for why one study supports one side, you can also make an argument usually that the same data supports the other side. So we don't know the mechanism behind this evidence that we're pulling out. So you can come up with studies. Once again, I didn't hit the go forward button there. That's so strange. You can come up with evidence. You can come up with studies to test these things out. And it just isn't ever quite there to say whether language is innate or not. Like we talked about earlier, language is important for everything, spoken, written, body language, ASL. And it's a complicated process. How do you get from one thought to another? To answer that question, we have to talk about Wundt really quickly. Wundt is this guy with these tiny little glasses. He's considered the father of modern experimental psychology because he was really pushing for this idea of experiment replicability. Do an experiment, do it again. Do you get the same result? This is really kind of one of the crux positions of the scientific method. And it's really important when you're dealing with something like language, psychology, cognition, anything like that, because it's messier than does gravity work right now. Gravity's always working, so you don't need to replicate it. You should, like, drop something twice to make sure gravity's working, I guess. But it's really important when you're dealing with more messy concepts like these. Wundt also worked with Helmholtz and Fechner. That's not really important unless you are a nerd like me. So Helmholtz is really big into auditory research. A lot of my research is also auditory, so I cite Helmholtz a lot. Actually, I think I cite Helmholtz in almost every paper I write on auditory stuff. This is Helmholtz. This is one of his tuning fork inventions. Before computers, he had to figure out fancy ways to give people pure tones. And then also he worked with Fechner, who is really cool. He works with vision and also just all general perception, all the different ways to perceive the world. I also work with vision. He was really interested in staring at the sun too long. In fact, he went blind, partially blind, because he stared at the sun too long thinking about visual perception. Crazy dude. So, Wundt had this idea that people should be involved in introspection as a way to figure out thinking and language and perceptions. So you have to carefully monitor your thoughts and perceptions, how they form, how they go from one to another. And he thought this was the best way to study language. If you have an idea and you have to connect it to another idea. So how do you get there? Do you consciously choose all the words in that path? Like if you're talking to I'm going to tell you right now, I have points that I want to hit. I have points on the slides I want to hit. I have ideas from looking at my slides that I want to talk about. I do not have them written out. So I have points and I got to go from point to point. So how do I do this? I don't consciously, well, maybe I do. I don't consciously pre-plan all the words that I use to get from point A to point B. But do I consciously choose all the words along this path? Or is it sort of an automatic process from main idea to main idea? Is there just something in here that runs and says, okay, you hit this point, go along the path, fill in all the little words to get to the next one? It's an interesting question. This is also an interesting way to study the mind and its development. And speaking of the mind and its development, you can't talk about that without talking about Piaget. Piaget's biggest contribution in the language area, huge in developmental psychology. We're just going to talk about him a little bit because the language component was there, but not one of the main cruxes of the work. So he noted that children are like little experimentalists. They're doing all sorts of experiments to learn about the world. This includes with speaking, like trying out new ways to like form phonemes and new ways to convey ideas as well. As children learn and understand, they graduate to new developmental stages, like object permanence. If you've had Psych 101, you know about object permanence. If you don't, it's not really important for this. But that also is true for language. So language changes along with cognitive development. There's different stages of language development, and he thought that language is sometimes an insight into the mental world, and that these language stages progressed as the inner cognitive world developed. So there's a huge link between language and cognition. This is why we look at things like working memory, priming, all sorts of things like that. Now, here's one of the two big names we have to talk about in this area. This is B.F. Skinner. I should know what the B.F. stands for, and I don't, because I've always just known him as B.F. Skinner. Skinner's a behaviorist, and basically what that means is that he believed anyone or any living animal could be trained to do anything through a series of behavioral reinforcements and punishments. So classical conditioning, again, if you've had Psych 101 already, this is a Skinner thing. Before I move on to talk about some of the things that he did with pigeons, doesn't he like totally look like Colin Firth from The Kingsman? Like, right? Anyway, how can you get a pigeon to dance? Well, you can get a pigeon to dance by using behaviorist methods. So what you do is you reinforce the pigeon coming towards you. So you give it a little treat. I don't know what pigeons eat. Pigeon treats, I guess. So you give them some pigeon treats, Oreo cookies. There we go. It comes back around. So you give them a little piece of an Oreo cookie. They come towards you. So they come towards you, you reward that behavior. Then what you do is you stop giving them a treat until they turn right. And once they turn right, you give them a treat. And then they turn right again, you give them a treat. Soon they turn all the way around, and then you give them a treat. They turn around the other way. Then they learn like these dance moves of turn right, turn left, walk over here, come back, turn right, turn left, walk over here, come back, and you've trained it to dance. There's other things. You can teach them how to dance. You can teach them how to play tennis. You can teach them how to play ping pong. This is a video of some pigeons playing ping pong. And they were taught to do this by behavioral reinforcement through treats, basically. I don't know if he used Oreo cookies. Probably not. But that's the game. And when you win, you get a treat. So the goal is to just keep hitting these ping pong balls back and forth. And when you win, you get a treat. This guy's really good. Yeah. All right. So, tennis, ping pong, teach them how to dance, all this stuff. Why was it always with pigeons? I don't know. I guess they're cheap. Hey, I think my picture is covering up this image that I have of a crying child. This is the I'm going to move down here for this slide. So children shape parents' behavior. If you have kids or pets, you're going to know about this. This is another behaviorist principle. So a child is going to cry for a toy. The parent's like, no. The child continues to cry. The parent says, no. The child continues to cry. Finally, the parent gives in. And so then what the child learns from this interaction is that the longer I cry, I just have to keep crying. Like sustained crying is the answer to get the thing that I want. And also, parents are learning to give in. They're like, the kid's going to keep crying as much as, like, it's just going to keep going. I might as well give in. It's learning this all the way around. My dog totally does this. Did this, R.I.P. For treats. So she would eat her breakfast and then she would come and stare at me and start barking. And I'd be like, I don't know what you want. She wants a dog bone. So I'd have to go get her one of those. But eventually she learned if I just keep barking at him, he will eventually figure it out and give me a dog bone. This time I gave her a yogurt cup, 2 of them. And she thought that was as good as a dog bone. Okay. I gotta move my head back up. Okay. Aversion therapy works this way too. Aversion therapy is like, to a phobia that you might have. So you're going to reduce a behavior by pairing it with an undesired stimulus. So this example works particularly for people that are alcoholics. What they'll do is they'll put ipecac in with an alcoholic drink. Ipecac is a chemical that basically makes you throw up constantly and violently for a long time. It's not actually bad for you, so it's safe, but it feels terrible. So you have somebody who's an alcoholic and you give them a nice alcoholic drink that has ipecac in it. So they drink it and they get sick. And what happens is they now begin to pair feeling sick with alcohol. And they end up having no more desire for alcohol because before the alcohol can even get to the point that it, begins to intoxicate them, they're throwing it up. It's pretty effective. 69% of aversion therapy alcoholics remain sober after 18 months. I don't know how that pairs up with other things like Alcoholics Anonymous, but 69% is pretty good. And so how does this work with language? Well, language develops, this is the argument, is that it develops in a behaviorist way. So a child wants a sweet pastry thing. The mom says, oh, you want this cookie? The child learns the word cookie because if I know the word cookie, then I can ask specifically for the cookie, using the word cookie. And this is the very first reinforcement. I know the word for the thing I want, which means I can more easily ask for the thing I want. Then we have Chomsky. And he believed that there is this poverty in the outside world, in the stimulus that we're given. It's just not enough, doesn't have enough information. There's not enough information in the language that we speak or in the visual scene that's outside or whatever to be reinforcers. There's not enough information in language to reinforce this. It doesn't make sense. That's going to create a reinforcement that could teach a child how to speak a language. Instead, and an additional question is, how can there be novel sentences and ideas if language is behaviorist? If you've just learned it based off of reinforcement, how can you combine all that into creating something new because you just learned it in a way to be able to ask for it? So, because of all those reasons, language has to be innate. And if language is innate, that means that there's some sort of language acquisition device in the head. It's not like a real device. Some people who believe in this, some nativists is what it's called. They are called. So we have behaviorists and nativists. You also have behaviorists and universal grammarians, and those are embodied by Skinner, nativist. Skinner, behaviorist, and then Chomsky is a universal grammarian or a nativist. The language acquisition device is not like a necessarily real device. It's just a part of the brain. Some universal grammarians say that it is an actual area in the brain. Some say it's not really an actual area. It's just like a system of like a network of neurons that come together to create this. The language acquisition device gives rise to universal grammar, which is also abbreviated UG. And universal grammar is the key to underlying similarities between English and Japanese and Thai and Farsi. And I ran out of languages for some reason. There's so many more. Here's a lot of them on this tree. Universal grammar says that a lot of languages are similar in some ways. Well, this is not universal grammar that says this. It is actually true. A lot of languages do happen to be similar. Universal grammar could be the reason for this. 96% of the world's languages have the subject occurring before the object. So you could have verb, subject, object. You could have subject, verb, object. Those are two different ways to organize it, but those both put the subject before the object, and 96% of the world's languages work that way. The subject comes first. Language that comes on the same branch of this tree probably has, a similar verb placement, although not always. English and German are related, but we have different verb order placements. But a lot of these languages are going to have similar subject-object placement. There's very few and not widely spoken languages that don't adhere to the subject before object rule. And could that be universal grammar? Perhaps. Another thing that universal grammarians point to is that there are grammatically correct nonsense sentences, such as colorless green ideas sleep furiously, or indefensible fortifications feel lovingly ambivalent. A universal grammar allows a sentence to sound fine, but the actual language rules make it completely meaningless. All the little things fall into place, the adverbs and the verbs and the way that those go together, all the syntax and the grammar is just totally fine. It sounds fine, but the actual meaning isn't there. Again, this is a point that universal grammarians use to say, how could you make sense of this if you don't have some sort of underlying native aspect to language that says this works, even though it actually logically doesn't because of individual little language rules. And then lastly, we have this is an example of a impoverished stimulus. So Katie saw Jim at the bar. What does this imply? Well, it implies Jim is at the bar because that's what it says. Katie saw Jim at the bar, so Jim was at the bar. It implies that Katie sees Jim. And it also implies that Katie's at the bar. This evidence isn't in the sentence. And this is another point that universal grammarians use to say that there's more going on with language than what's conveyed in this sentence. So in the sentence, we do have direct evidence that Jim is at the bar. We have direct evidence that Katie saw Jim, but we don't have evidence that Katie was at the bar. The fact that we know this, according to universal grammarians, is because of our language acquisition device, because of native grammar. Is this sentence an impoverished stimulus? Is this because universal grammar has helped us understand the extra information? And now we're going to get to something called natural regularities. This is an area that I do a lot of my work in. It's similar to behaviorism in a way. Two things co-occur. And when they co-occur enough, it means that we can perceive one of them when we only hear the other. An example of this is frequency and intensity. If you've had any other class with me, I think I talk about this a lot. But as frequency increases, it sounds like something gets louder. As loudness increases, it sounds like something gets higher in pitch. This is a graph over here of people speaking all the way to yelling in anger. Their intensity goes up and their frequency goes up as they move up in those different conditions. And this just happens because of, there's a few reasons why it might happen. Some are that there's actual strain in the pharynx that would actually make the frequency increase. But we might also be doing this because we hear intensity and frequency being correlated together. So as we move up in intensity, we're going to make ourselves move up in frequency. Even if we're not, the fact that this happens physically can lead to the perception that this is happening even when it's not. So when we hear somebody's voice move up in intensity, we assume it's also moving up in frequency, even if it's not, possibly because it usually does. This happens in nature as well, and based on natural regularities, we think that people who believe in natural regularities think that there is no such thing as an impoverished stimulus. In fact, we think that there is a lot more information available to the senses than we cognitively are actually aware of. You learn the correlation between the width of a doorway and if you can pass. So as you walk up to a doorway, can I make it through that? You don't have to decide this every time you go through a doorway, or if you're hiking between two rocks or something like that. You learn the visual angle on your eye and if you're going to be able to make it through. You just know it. You don't have to measure it. You don't have to walk up slowly and see if you go through. You know if you can or not. You also know if it's going to be close. So you're like, I'm going to have to slow down and check this one out. And you know that it's at that region where it's like, maybe, maybe not. This bird over here below my face is a gannet. And they dive into the water to catch fish. They know when to tuck their wings in based on how fast the surface of the water is coming up at them. If they hit the water with their wings outstretched, like it is further up in the picture, it would break their wings and they wouldn't be able to hunt for food anymore. If they close their wings too early, they don't get an accurate dive for the fish that they want, so they're not able to catch fish. So they have to fold their wings in at exactly the right moment. They go into they shape themselves like a little bullet or a torpedo right before they hit the water. All of these birds do this really well. They don't do it very well at birth. They have to learn it. And what they do is they learn the time to contact with the way that the water looks on their retina. So they learn the feel, like it's going to feel like I contact the water when the water looks like this, and that's when I need to tuck my wings in and go in. They learn it. So language, according to people that believe in natural regularities like me, language is not impoverished. Katie saw Jim at the bar. We understand space and vision. We all see things. We know that we have to be close to something to see it, barring looking at somebody on a video recording. Like you have a Nest camera at the bar for some reason and you can see that somebody's there. That's probably not going to happen. So we understand how space and vision work. You have to be at the bar or like close, maybe across the street, to see that somebody else is there. You can't just scry it through a crystal ball. So it's not necessarily that the language has this assumption in it. It's that our life, going through life, we know that these things have to be true. So we have all these correlations in place. When you see that someone's at the bar, you probably needed to be close to see it. So the implication is there that Katie was also there. Okay. Illusions and natural regularities, we'll go through this really fast, but illusions are usually understood as failures of perception. But to people that believe in natural regularities, perception isn't failing. What's happening is that perception's being fooled by a misalignment of things that are usually correlated. The world is usually correlated, so you can just perceive these things as being correlated, but sometimes they're not, and you get an illusion. These colors right here, below my face, A and B. So at the top, A and B look very different. And then at the bottom, those are the same colors of gray. And those are the same colors of gray on those strips that are coming down below. And they're just showing that they're the same color. They look different because one's in shadow and one's in light. In the real world, those would be different colors, because to maintain the lightness in the shadow cast by that cylinder, it would have to be a light color. But in this case, in this weird case where we've messed with the natural world, because this isn't the natural world, this is just a picture, we can screw up your ability to see things correctly and be like, oh, gotcha, they're actually the same color even though you perceive them as different. But we've learned in our lives, where there are shadows and all sorts of things, that colors will appear differently in shadows. So this isn't a time when perception's failing us. It's a time when two things that should be correlated aren't. And illusions can actually give us a clue where natural regularities are. The fact that this illusion works shows that there's a natural regularity between color constancy and things being in shadow. So are there natural regularities for sentences? Is colorless green ideas sleep furiously? It is a linguistic illusion. Is there a natural regularity there? There's got to be some sort of natural regularity there for us to have it as this linguistic illusion. One other quick point that I want to make is yes, there are linguistic illusions and there are linguistic natural regularities. One of these is letter entropy. Can the makeup of words be contrary to the natural regularity? Is there a natural regularity of how words are made up? And yes, there are actually nonsense words, like words that are used in Dr. Seuss books that are not real words, like Lorax and there's others. I don't know. Look it up. Anyway, I'm sure on your shelf you've got Fox and Socks or whatever. So the way that Seuss words work is fundamentally different than the way English words work. There's a mathematical difference in the entropy between letters, the way that the letters work out in Dr. Seuss words and English words. So there is a natural regularity for English words. And then Dr. Seuss uses these, exploits the natural regularity to create this illusion, which makes them sound silly. They sound funny because they don't really make sense. An example from this paper that I'm citing is the phrase existential llama. It's funny because it's not normal. You could say angry llama. You could put a whole bunch of different kinds of emotions in there. But llamas can be angry, they can be happy. But being existential is kind of funny because you don't typically think of a llama as contemplating the nature of the universe. So that's why it's a more funny adjective than angry. And this, again, is exploiting the natural regularity. Llamas can be angry. We learn that there are like emotions that animals will feel. It's unusual for us to think that they're contemplating the meaning of life. And so an existential llama is funny. So this shows that there is a natural regularity, at least in how letters in individual words are chosen to be together, and that Dr. Seuss words exploit that natural regularity to create that goofy, silly sound that Dr. Seuss words have. So there is a natural regularity to words, and that means there probably is for sentence structure as well. Another quick point is there's also a researcher named Vygotsky. He's an interactionist, a little Chomsky, a little Skinner, a little nativist, a little behaviorist. And I think, personally, this is me, the idea of an impoverished stimulus kind of, I think, cheapens the natural world. There's so much information out in the world that thinking that there's no information out there kind of like, it just ruins like the natural wonder of the world and kind of makes it be like humans are so special that we can like pull meaning from places where there isn't meaning. It almost seems a little bit like magical and weird. It also cheapens our perceptual apparatus, like how good we are at seeing patterns and hearing patterns. And then our brains, it cheapens that idea too, because our brains are so good at like finding these patterns we're not even consciously aware of, but it can find them. And then influence our behavior just from experiencing the world. So that's my feeling. Again, this is an active debate. And if one resonates with you more than the other one, it should. That's fine. You don't have to apologize to anybody for that. That's a perfectly normal thing, because this debate is not settled. In fact, one of the things that you should keep in mind through the class is, number one, how could this be tested behaviorally and with imaging? So any topic that we talk about, how could this be tested? This kind of helps your mind think like a person who does this kind of research. It helps you think like a psycholinguist or a cognitive scientist. And then also, which theory of language does this support? We're going to learn about so many things. And does this support innate language, or does it support behaviorism? Does it support natural regularities, which is kind of off in the behaviorist side? It's actually pretty close to being behaviorist. So think about those throughout the class. All right, that's the end of this video. After this, they're a lot shorter. This was just kind of an intro to the whole thing, and then we're going to break them into little, much more digestible chunks. All right.